So let's switch over to my Mac and get started. So to use PyCharm, it's pretty simple. You open it up and you just say, create a new project. You can see there's a lot of different kinds of projects we can create. We're just going to do a pure Python app for our beginning one, but we could create a Django, Flask, or Pyramid web app, even a Google App Engine app. And there's also a lot of HTML, JavaScript options because PyCharm is a full-featured JavaScript, CSS, HTML editor, in addition to being a great Python editor. So I actually already have a project I created just by basically saying OK on the next screen. And when you create a new Python app, a pure Python app, you end up with basically a blank folder. So we're going to come over here and add a new Python file. So we'll right click and say new Python file. And throughout this class, the main program that you run that indicates sort of the entry point into this set of scripts or Python files that we're building is going to be named program.py. So I'm going to create something called program.py. I'm using Git to store all the files and demos that I create for you during this class, which I'll make publicly available for you to look at and see how they've evolved over time. And you can see that PyCharm is actually suggesting that we add this to our Git repository. I'm just going to tell it to please don't ask again. Now remember, the first thing that our little sample app had was it had a little header with some dashes, and it said hello app, and it sort of was bracketed by kind of a dashed line above and below. So let's go about creating that. So we're going to use something called the print function. And this is typically the way that you output things to the console. We can say print, and then here we can put a string. And in Python, you can create strings with double quotes like this, or you can create strings with single quotes like that. And I actually prefer the single quotes. It's just a little less typing. You'll see there's sometimes you might want to use double quotes. You might want to use single quotes. We'll talk about that later. So we're going to come over here and we're just going to have our dashes like so. And then we also want to output that little hello app part. So we'll come over and say print. Go over and say hello app. I think it looked pretty much like that. We can come over and say print, and we'll just do this one more time. Let's go ahead and run this and just make sure there's some reasonable output. First thing to do, save this. Now I could go to the console, to the terminal, and just run that. I can easily do that by saying copy path. We'll go down here and I can type Python 3 and I can just give it the path and hit go. And then out comes our output, hello app. Perfect. But PyCharm lets us run this and debug it and do all sorts of cool runtime analysis of our app right from within PyCharm. And you can see there's a little debug icon here and a little play icon here, but they're both grayed out. And that's because there's no run configuration set up. So instead of going over here, we're just going to right click and say run the program, and it will create a run configuration and save that for us going forward. So just like before in the terminal, we have hello app. Very, very nice. We also maybe want a little space between here. So we can actually just call print with no arguments, and that'll just do a new line. Now, the next thing that we did in our app was we actually asked the user what their name was. So we could actually get down to the system input, output streams and directly work with those. But Python, there's a simpler way. We can just say input. Now, this also takes a string, and we can say something like, what is your name? Put a little space, and then in the console, the cursor is just going to stop right there and wait for the user to put some input. So let's just go ahead and run that. I can click this, or I can just hit Control R. In Windows, I believe that's F5, and on the Mac, it's Control R. And down here, you can see it's asking what my name is. So I'll say my name is Michael. Then it waits, and we'll hit Enter. It accepts the input and moves on. Now, that's not super helpful because we're not actually getting the name. We're just asking the question. So let's take a moment and look at a couple of core concepts that we're working with here.